and who I suspect will get an even larger applause tonight than perhaps another. Eylon Levy. He was appointed as an Israeli government spokesman after the commencement of the war. You've all seen him on TV, you've all seen him on viral videos, you've seen his eyebrows, I suspect. He's the host of the State of the Nation podcast. He previously served as the international media advisor to the President of Israel after a career as a TV news anchor. He was born and raised in the UK. He studied at the Universities of Oxford and Cambridge before making Aliyah and serving in the IDF. Eylon Levy.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. During this war, no few journalists have given me grief, but Gil, I've always liked you. So it's a pleasure to be introduced by you today. After around 500 media appearances over the last 5 months, I want to share with you some personal thoughts and reflections in a personal capacity about what it has been like since October 7th, fighting the good fight for Israel in the international media, trying not only to win us time to finish the job of destroying Hamas and bringing back the hostages, but also to make sure that this war ends with our friendships and alliances intact and our friends and allies understanding that we are doing exactly what they would do, or rather what they would like to think that they would be capable of doing if such atrocities were perpetrated against them. And the first thing I'll say is that I'm always slightly embarrassed when people point to me as somehow being the face of Israeli Hasbara, because it's a team effort, and this is absolutely not a burden that I have been carrying on my shoulders alone over the last few months. And it goes all the way from the top. Prime Minister Netanyahu has rolled up his sleeves and been fighting in the trenches, giving regular TV interviews. And every time the Prime Minister gives one of his fantastic interviews, I take out a pen and paper and immediately jot down all the information and all the sound bites, because he still has a phenomenal ability to express things succinctly and clearly. The President, our wonderful President, Isaac Herzog, my former boss, I was his international media advisor, has also been taking the fight to the international media and doing Piers Morgan and CNN and all the major appearances as well. I'm part of a team that includes the incredible Ambassador Mark Regev, who is really my mentor and guide and has taught me so much of what I know and has been really an inspiration and a mentor. Tal Heinrich, who is an absolute tiger, who got on a plane on October 7th, has been doing interviews mostly from the studios in the United States and as well here in Israel, giving the press conferences, an absolute tiger. Avi Hyman, who started off mostly doing our press bookings and has now been taking on a huge number of interviews as well and fighting that corner. And of course the professional apparatus of the National Public Diplomacy Directorate, led by Moshe Kaviv, who had the unenviable task at the beginning of this war of trying to mount an effective response, and has done really a terrific job in bringing together the army and the police and the foreign ministry and all the different agencies to sit around one table, make sure that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet. What do we say in the Jewish tradition? Not singing from the same hymn sheet. Making sure that we're all coordinated, and that coordinated effort has meant that Israel is putting up a much better fight as a country than it has in any previous war. And that's even before I get on to speaking about all the IDF spokespeople who've done a terrific job. Peter Lerner and Jonathan Conricus, who together, they managed at the peak of this war to do more interviews in a day than I was managing in a week, and I was exhausted. Daniel Hagari, who's been giving regular briefings as well. And of course, all the amazing soldiers, the IDF spokespersons unit. So really, everyone in this country, from the President and the Prime Minister to the 19-year-old girls in Dover Tzahal, have been putting on a phenomenal fight in making sure that we can still retain international support and solidarity, and it really is not to be taken for granted, as you mentioned earlier, that we still have international support 166 days on. It's no secret, there is pressure, there are disagreements, but our allies understand that this war has to end with the hostages home and Hamas out of power, and none of them are saying, you know what, it's time to call it quits, abandon the hostages and leave Hamas there. They are still signed on to the goals that the government under Prime Minister Netanyahu determined after Hamas declared war on October 7th, and that is absolutely not something we can take for granted. The sheer barbarity of the atrocities did a lot of it, but the work of everyone I've been speaking about has helped to sustain that support. Now, it's not easy because the information battlefield is not even. When I go on TV or any of the other spokespeople as spokespeople for the Israeli government or the National Public Diplomacy Directorate in the Prime Minister's office, I'm going against the UN Special Envoy for special humanitarian, nice, fluffy, duffy, nice things. And these are agencies and organizations that have simply been hijacked by the Palestinian agenda. The World Health Organization cannot bring itself to condemn Hamas's militarization of hospitals. The Red Cross cannot bring itself to condemn Hamas hijacking aid trucks. UNRWA actively covers up Hamas's theft of aid. There was a remarkable incident at the beginning of the war when UNRWA tweeted that officials purporting to be from the Gaza Ministry of Health stole fuel and medical supplies from one of their warehouses and their staff had to flee. Luckily, someone took a screenshot because they deleted it minutes later and then put out a correction that sounded like someone had put a gun to their social media intern's head, saying, "We deny reports on social media." What reports on social media? These were your own tweets. And then I had to go on the BBC after an UNRWA spokesperson and they say, well, UNRWA assures us that Hamas cannot steal their aid. I said, what are you talking about? They admitted it. They deleted it. And now they're covering it up. They are in on it. They are in on it. And so when the World Health Organization comes out with a statement about Israel attacking medical facilities, or UNRWA makes a statement about famine or genocide or whatever they've been saying since October 7th, okay? The electricity that keeps running out and never does, the Hanukkah miracle. It's not an even battlefield. It is not an even battlefield. It's David against Goliath. What makes it worse, apart from having to deal with experts who have UN on their business card, and therefore Hamas is using them to launder information. Using them to launder information for global consumption, is that the platforms through which we are trying to spread the information are weighted against us because they like things that are already popular in order to make them viral. So if you've got 15 million Jews in the world, not all of whom are on our side, against 2 billion Muslims who are broadly very consistent with their message sheet, it's not an easy fight. It's not an easy fight because, you know, I've seen Israeli influencers saying I can go to Kfar Aza and film myself and talk about the atrocities, and TikTok's algorithm will actively suppress it, while someone in middle of nowheresville, Canada can make a video saying Israel's committing genocide, and it will get millions and millions of views. So the information battlefield is not easy and it's a huge challenge, and that's why it requires such tenacity and such a concerted team effort. Now what I've been trying to do since October 7th is to say there are no rules. I'm going to try to reinvent what it means to be a government spokesman in Israel but also internationally, and pursue basically 3 strategies together with a team of incredible volunteers. This would not have been possible without a team of volunteers working for me. To say, we want to get information to people in the format that they most enjoy consuming content. It's not enough just to put out a press release and hope that the world does something with it. You be the world. You go do something with it. So we've had 3 prongs, instead of just waiting for CNN to call me and invite me on an interview. The first is press conferences. Never happened before that Israeli government spokespeople are giving a daily press conference in which journalists can ask questions. It was a decision made at the beginning of the war, backed by Moshe Gaviv, the head of the Ma'alach HaHasbara. There would be a podium, it would say on a Prime Minister's office, and the spokesman would get up, give a recap of the day's stories, how we want to frame it. Journalists can ask questions over Zoom. There was a period when we had a physical press room as well. Absolutely critical in being able to set the agenda, not having to respond to questions. I then get off an interview, I get off a press conference and immediately see where I'm getting quoted in all the live updates of the media channels because they're watching. There was a point at the peak of the... Hi, Graham! There was a point at the peak of the last hostage release pause in November, and please, please, God, may we have another one soon. Now. In which the BBC, Sky News, Fox News would interrupt their broadcasts to dip into, we are now going to, the Israeli government is holding a press conference. And they would take for 10 minutes, me or the other government spokespeople standing in front of a podium and explaining the situation. That was a surreal out-of-body experience to get off and suddenly see that the BBC and Sky News had dipped into that life. That's the first strategy. Press conferences, you can put out a statement, it's good for the media, but they need to see it on videos. You put it in video and you give them something, a soundbite they can use in their reports. The second prong is social media. Journalists like to get their material on Twitter. Sometimes the easiest thing to do is simply to scroll through someone's Twitter account and see what they've been saying and then quote them. Okay? In the last week, I was able to get quotes in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and The Guardian about the food situation in Gaza because they simply quoted things that I was tweeting. Another strategy is to try to be a content creator. People enjoy watching, doing this on their phones to get materials. So take the information and do that. And I've got a great social media assistant who says, listen, there's this great trend now on TikTok, we should do this, we should do that. And try to be as creative as possible in making, showing a hummus recipe. Or I had one where I sat in Dizengoff Square with one of the chaps on my team. He wrote a cover of Hey There Delilah called Hey There Hania about Hamas leaders living in luxury abroad. Maybe I'll sing it for you later. So trying to provide information in that form of entertainment because that's how people enjoy getting their information. So you get to make a message about Hamas corruption. And the third is the podcast that I've launched. State of the Nation, which is a podcast but really more of a talk show because we've built a whole studio. It is being backed by the Diaspora Ministry. Minister Amichai Shikli has very generously put money behind it as against matching funding because we said people enjoy getting their information through podcasts. So come and be a fly on the wall as the spokesman has an in-depth conversation with policymakers, journalists, other spokespeople, and gets briefed about what is happening. And we're really breaking the rules. 2 weeks ago I was in New York and filmed an episode of the podcast with Congressman Richie Torres in his office in the Bronx. And I'm pretty happy to put money on it, once we manage to raise the money to keep the podcast afloat, that is probably the first time that a foreign government spokesman has ever interviewed a sitting politician from another country for their own semi-official media platform. So that's what we've been trying to do over the last 166 days. I don't think any of us thought it was going to go on so long. There's a long and dangerous road ahead with Rafah, the Prime Minister today saying, of course we will eventually move into Rafah. We have no choice. We're not going to leave the remainder of Hamas's battalions standing, keeping up that military pressure to get back the hostages. 134, we know 35 are dead. We have to continue fighting as if the other 99 are alive. And of course, the very scary situation in the north, which can explode at any moment. Because we have tens of thousands of people who have been refugees in their own country for nearly 6 months. We need to get them back home. That's our first duty as a state. So that's a brief recap of everything we've been trying to do at the National Public Diplomacy Directorate in the Prime Minister's office and personal reflections. Let's move on to the discussion. Any questions you have? Thank you.
Does this work? Yes, good. Okay, so firstly, that was fantastic to hear both of you, and to hear, I know what a wonderful job Honest Reporting does, and we can talk more about that as well. And you absolutely should subscribe if you're not already subscribed to Honest Reporting. And Eylon, that was an amazing...
and subscribe to the podcast as well.
And subscribe to Eylon's podcast, State of the Nation. And Eylon, that was an amazing behind-the-scenes look at what you've been doing. We've all seen you in front of the camera, now we know a little about what's been going on behind the scenes. Okay, I'm going to get to questions from you guys, don't worry. I have a few of my own first. So I'm going to start with a question for both of you. And it's a question which I think many of us ask ourselves when we watch or read international media reporting on Israel. And those of us who've been doing so for many years have been asking for many years. And it's really this, it's, where do you put the balance of the source of the animosity and the hostility and the double standards and all these things? Is it, for some people, I know people who will just say, it's anti-Semitism. Okay, I think some people would just say, it's all anti-Semitism. And I personally think a lot of it is, not all of it, but a lot of it is, but I'm interested to know where you think anti-Semitism fits into it. But also, where is it just ignorance, where is it just, I don't know, the sort of human inclination to side with the underdog and the I think, misapprehension that Israel is the sort of oppressive force in this conflict. So I'm interested in what is your experience, each of you, what has your experience told you about what is the source of the double standards and the animosity and the sort of seeming inability to apply fair journalistic standards to reporting on Israel? Who wants to go first?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so anyone who thought that there was not rampant anti-Semitism around the world, including the leader of a major American Jewish organization who said at a very large event that in the fight against anti-Semitism the cup was half full, was proven wrong on October 7th and since then. And this is a very serious problem, and it hasn't been dealt with, and now we see that it must be dealt with, and it's not being dealt with properly. That's number one. Number two, absolutely there is inclination to support the underdog. I'm a Cubs fan, I get it. But there are plenty of people who misunderstand who the underdog is. With the most discriminated against minority in the world, it's the small country surrounded by enemies, and we have to constantly be getting that message out. And ignorance that you pointed out, including among top journalists, we've seen it happen time and time again. The journalists parachuted into Israel from Ukraine, from America, without having any background to understand what's going on here. With a very short period of time to get news out without being able to understand the depth of the conflict. It's the wrong model for getting the news out there. And in Gaza, it's even worse. Because there, the government made a controversial decision, I understand both sides of it, to not let journalists in unaccompanied by Israel. So there have been some that have been embedded, that's important. But because they aren't allowed in, the majority of the news from Gaza is coming from ordinary Gazans with cell phones and freelancers who were hired with very low standards.
Look, as a government spokesman, I have to be very careful about the information that I get and make sure that I'm using specific sources, and that's why I'm especially attuned to what the sources of information are and where they're coming from. So here's a story, for example, about how information gets looked at. Headline in The Guardian a month ago, UN officials warn Israel is not complying with the ICJ order. Interesting. Who are these UN officials? Well, none other than Francesca Albanese, who, get your groggers out, who famously tweeted that went out of her way to deny that October 7th was an anti-Semitic massacre, who on International Women's Day released this revoltingly condescending tweet to Israeli women saying, "My dears, I hope you realize what you have become." Their consciences are clear, they know exactly what they are fighting for. Who couldn't bring herself to shed even crocodile tears after the original atrocities, do anything for the hostages, and in fact, as Hillel Neuer and the great team at UN Watch have shown, was known to be a deeply, deeply problematic character even before the UN appointed her, and her appointment was not despite that, it was because of it. So she gets to go in a headline as UN official says. And then there's the ICJ, which relied in its original decision on statements made by UNRWA, which is a Hamas front. It is the principal organ that Hamas uses in order to launder its information. The same organization that employs terrorists on a massive scale, that allows terrorists to dig tunnels under its schools with shafts inside the school grounds. The same UNRWA that covered up Hamas's theft of aid. The same UNRWA that, by the way, one of the reasons it's becoming difficult to distribute aid inside Gaza is the breakdown of law and order as a result of Israel attacking the Hamas gunmen who used to secure the convoys. Everyone took it for granted that the United Nations relied on Hamas to protect convoys of aid while it knew that Hamas was stealing aid. And that didn't strike anyone as being unusual. So here, you as an Israeli government official have to respond to the UN saying that you're not in compliance with an ICJ order based on this awful official who denies that that October 7th was an anti-Semitic massacre, quoting a decision made on the basis of information from the principal organ that is used by Hamas to launder information and is 99% staffed by Palestinians and hired some of the people who were responsible for the October 7th massacre. It's not even battlefield. But you try, when you have behind you the menorah and the signed National Public Diplomacy Directorate to the Prime Minister's Office of the State of Israel, to fight with the United Nations Special Rapporteur for da-da-da, who is quoting another UN organ, which is quoting another UN organ, which is quoting with another UN organ, which maybe in the small print says, disclaimer, these numbers come from the Ministry of Health and have not been verified. But the moment that the UN quotes them, no matter what disclaimer or small print they put at the top or at the bottom, it's good enough for the UN. And so I find myself that sometimes the best I can do is not to shape the story, it's just to get a good quote, a killer quote in the story. Because if they've got all these UN officials and all these human rights organizations and all these think tanks telling them that I'm a liar, you don't go against the people who have that critical mass. It takes courage to say, well, hang on. Maybe the Israelis actually have a point. And that will shape the story.
Wow. So the media are getting their information from UNRWA and from revolting specimens like Frederick Albanese, and as you said, Gil, from ordinary Palestinians who are, have their own obvious agenda, and their things that they're saying are being treated as sort of fact without being verified or anything else. I want to ask, Eylon, I'll ask you actually, this is I think maybe something some of us are wondering. You've appeared on a number of news channels that many of us watch, some British, some American, some others. Are there particular channels or maybe particular news anchors or interviewers that you know in advance it's going to be particularly tough? They are particularly likely to want to come across as hostile, to start a fight with you essentially. And if so, how do you prepare differently for those kinds of things?
Yeah, of course. Every journalist takes a different approach. Piers Morgan, for example, is a gotcha journalist. He will try to get you to prove you do not know, or to admit something. And then that's the headline. Okay, so I had this interview where the headline he got out of it was Israeli government spokesman admits he doesn't know exactly how many Hamas terrorists have been killed. And I told him, Piers, your brother who fought in Afghanistan was a war hero. he couldn't give you a running beat count in the middle of a war about exactly how many terrorists he'd killed. Your grandfather who fought the Japanese in Burma was also a war hero. He had no idea how many enemy combatants that he'd killed. As a way to try to get around and preempt that line of questioning. Channel 4 is always very hostile. Lewis Goodall, whose podcast, The News Agents, I enjoy very much, was one of the more difficult interviews I have. I found that both journalists, they took very different approaches. Krishnan on Channel 4 will take a certain point and then latch on, even when you think you've answered the question, again and again and again, so that answer's not good enough, it's not good enough, it's not good enough. And Lewis would have, who I really like, had an approach of trying to do a ping pong. Ask you a question, doesn't let you finish the question, passes a judgment on your answer, moves on to a different question, and then when you say, but I haven't finished my question, he says, but I think you have. And then and it's impossible to then ever complete a point. And the challenge is to try to remain calm and composed, because the story they want to tell is that the Israelis are violent and impetuous and cannot control themselves. And if you lose your cool in an interview, you reinforce that. If you can keep your calm and out passive-aggressive them, you send a different message about our phenomenal abilities of restraint.
Very good, very good. I remember you mentioned Channel 4. You mentioned Channel 4, I remember...
On a personal level, I like these people. I enjoy watching their shows.
So I was going to ask you, I remember years ago when I was working at the embassy, Israeli embassy in London, and I think it was the deputy ambassador went on Channel 4, and he told me that afterwards, it was Jon Snow, who in those days was the main... You
know nothing, Jon Snow.
Not that Jon Snow. This is a British journalist, Jon Snow. He did not appear in Game of Thrones. And he said that after the cameras were off, Jon Snow just went ballistic and launched this tirade of anti-Israel invective at the deputy ambassador. So I'm interested in how once the cameras are off, what are your relations like with these journalists that you might be in a room with, or?
Often a very hostile interview can end with, well, that was great, let's exchange numbers.
Fair enough.
They're doing their job, I'm doing my job.
Can I answer that?
Please.
One time I got interviewed to speak on Fox during the war. And I had come from Al Jazeera and RT and all kinds of anti-Israel media, and we were about to go on the air, and the anchor says to me, why don't you just go and beat the shit out of them there in Gaza? and the interview started with me laughing, and nobody knew why. But since we're being very critical of journalists, we should really single out one, Anderson Cooper of CNN. Because at the beginning of the war, he interviewed John Pullen and his wife Rachel Goldberg about Hirsch, who used to sit back of me in synagogue. And he said to them when the interview was done, hey, can I call you in a couple minutes? And when he did, he said, I have a video that I think is of your son, have you seen it? And they said, no. And that's how he told them about this video.
Wow.
And he could have done it on the air. He could have been what Eylon called a gotcha journalist. It would have made for great TV. But he chose to be a mensch instead.
Yeah, the good guys as well. Good guys. Gil, I'm going to ask you, you moved from journalism, from a very long, distinguished career in journalism to some, in a certain way, to the other side of the fence. You're now the executive editor and the director of an organisation that's monitoring journalists and critiquing journalists in all kinds of ways. What would you say? What do you take with you from your previous career into your current career? Do you think it gives you a particular view on sort of how to spot journalistic malpractice or that kind of thing?
Absolutely. I'm still very much a journalist. I'm very proud of it. I understand the difficulties that they're facing. I'm old enough to remember calling in a story on a payphone. I'm old enough to remember going to a press conference at 10 o'clock in the morning and having an 8 p.m. deadline and starting to write the story at 7:15 p.m. Nowadays, the work has gotten so much harder, and they have to, if they're in a press conference, have the story online with tweets and photographs and videos by the time the press conference is over. There's a character in The Little Prince called the lamplighter. He used to have the easiest job in the world. Once a day, he would turn on the lamp, and the other 12 hours later, he would turn it off. And then his planet started spinning faster. And so now he has to do it every minute. And now he has the worst job in the world. So I maintain that respect for journalists, and that many of them doing their best under difficult circumstances, but yes, too many of them are either ignorant or malicious, and it costs lives. That's important to know, that when they get things wrong,